That evening deprived me of sleep, not from fear, but from awkwardness. What had been said previously rolled over in my mind like a set of dice. God struck down Sodom and Gomorrah for aberrations that seemed to be commonplace here. Only one woman? My willingness to engage in anthropological studies only extended as far as my Lutheran dignity. Savage ways indeed. I permitted Sintra's cot to be placed in my tent at the opposite end. When I awoke, one could see that it had been moved towards me at some point in the night. She wasn't present when I awoke, which gave me a fractional panic. The sentry put my mind at ease. Somewhat.
She's in the surf, sir.
Doing what?
Fishing?
Why?
Didn't ask.
For how long has she been gone?
3, 4 hours.
And you let her out?
Didn't say to keep her in, sir.
You let a captive walk from a tent without stopping her? His face took on a red, flushed grin.
Yes, sir, I did.
I clapped him on the back of the head like father used to do when I wouldn't behave during church services. It was good that this fellow was among the infantry and not the artillery. Artillery service required a tighter mind, no disrespect to those reading that served on the line. Given that Moltke hadn't given us a heroic scream during the course of the night, she must not be seeking revenge. There was an aroma of cinnamon and cloves in the air. I didn't think it possible to bake good bread over the field kitchens, but someone must have been successful. I turned to my effects. Nothing had been disturbed. The cooks made their way around to the command, distributing plates of fried meat that carried that prior scent. One made its way to me, and without a close glance, it would have appeared as a plate of fried fish and clams. Clams? We didn't bring shellfish with us. I think Tirpitz squirreled away a pound of caviar amidst the navigational instruments, but you would have to murder the man to get him to give it up to the common soldier. The fish was odd, bearing a long spinal fin and a four-pronged tail. Flesh was white and well-breaded, tones of lemon. It seemed a bit barbaric to have Heinrich divide the portions for me. Perhaps this breakfast was an old friend of his at one point. There was nothing for it. I had to investigate the changes in the menu. The men didn't seem opposed to it, but we were cautioned about consuming the native flora and fauna. I checked in with Moltke before proceeding. The dish on his desk followed the pattern. He had been served the same thing. Cleaned his plate.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Moltke.
Excellent breakfast this morning. I don't recall packing clams on the list of provisions.
We didn't.
The men must have taken up forage.
Did you give such an order?
No, I thought you had done so, Your Majesty.
I did not. His puzzlement was a rare thing for his face to demonstrate. I was informed that our newest guest has been fishing this morning. Moltke grabbed at his neck and gave a hoarse cough. He peeked his head out from the tent, scanned the environs, and returned to me.
Poison, then?
I doubt it. At the rate by which the cooks have distributed the stuff, we all would have expired by now.
Slow acting, then?
Perhaps, but I think it would be best to confront the issue directly.
Sir?
I'm going to go find her and see if she's killed half of the men. Tell the cooks to stop dishing it out until I return. Judging by the noise, Moltke attempted to stimulate his gag reflex manually when I left him. I could hear the men complaining as the cooks hurled the fish into the fire. It wasn't difficult to confront the issue directly. The section of the camp closest to the water was alive with movement. Our doctrine always insisted that the pioneer groups stake camp closest to drinkable water, so that in the event of sudden shortages, they would utilize their equipment to secure the resource, or form bucket chains with it to put out tent fires. Discipline is a difficult thing in an army. It is a necessary component to the maintenance of armed men. Without it, we are a rabble. We Germans, we Prussians, are a stern people, and our training reflects this. The relatively recent abolishment of flogging in the English and French militaries is not an innovation that we elected to adopt. If a man misbehaves under command, he is to be punished. It is a basic tenet of service. It would be difficult to discipline the men for this, particularly as the engineer sections were a critical component of our mission, and coming down on them too hard might prove counterproductive. The sections had taken to driving empty supply wagons down to the shoreline, loading them from an enormous pile of fish that had accumulated and running them back to the cook stoves. I called forward the commander of the section, who informed me that this foraging would teach the men survival skills in this new environment, and would relieve the limited stores that we carried with us from continued use. It was difficult to argue with him. He returned to his tent as the bizarre improvised fish market continued its business. I continued down towards the shoreline, and the circumstances that allowed this incident became clear. There she was, hooked spear in hand, dancing through the surf, spearing her quandary and hurling the animals onto the beach, where several of our boys would retrieve them and in turn hurl them onto the growing pile. She had a captivated audience. Poor hard-up bastards. The brothels in New Kirkwall will fix this. 10 or 12 of the engineers, in full uniform, leaned on their rifles and watched. I approached rather silently behind them, to my pride, and wrapped my arm around the shoulder of the rightmost man. He didn't turn his head, had no idea I was there until I spoke.
Beautiful, isn't she?
Yes. This caused a bit of a shambles. The men fell over themselves attempting to salute. 3 or 4 of them started spitting out ranks, names, service branch, etc. While our laws permit it, I can't flog these men for this, but I could give them a tongue lashing. I took up my best Moltke impression. Who started this madness? There was a palpable fear. None came forward. Did anyone think to ask if the fish are safe for consumption? Did anyone think to ask why a prisoner was allowed to roam about the camp in the early hours of the morning? Did anyone think that their improper ogling of this woman would permit her people a sufficient diversion to stage an attack? Did anyone think at all? One finally spoke up, or rather, they all responded in unison.
No, sir. We did not think at all, sir.
48 hours duty owing for all of you then. Return to camp and report such assignments to your sergeant. I hadn't seen them move that fast since yesterday's trial by fire. As they returned to duty and their more bestial desires left them, I turned back to the surf. Sintra had stopped her activity now and ran towards me, spear in hand. Tight breath in, reach down. I left my sidearm on my desk. She dropped the spear onto the moist sand of the tidal beach. Exhale. In her other hand was one of those fish, which she hurled into the same area as before, with no one to help collect it.
King?
No. Prince. Sintra.
Happy sign. Flight fish herd below.
She pointed towards the surf, and below, 1,000 glimmering fins of these animals caught the light in a swirling, undulating mass. No wonder they were able to retrieve hundreds of them. There must have been tens of thousands lurking below. They moved like blown glass, dripping into tiny tendrils, coalescing in squat, round swarms over and over. Then the show began. Those rising up from the lowest, murkiest depths propelled themselves upwards and breached the surf. Their strange fins propelled them through the air like birds, and dozens of them repeated this process until a solid trail of the silver scales led from the breakwater and into the sky. Wonders never cease. Between this bizarre happening and her, I had nearly forgotten why I came. And then I remembered. Sintra.
Prince?
Safe to eat? I pointed at the school, flock, herd of fish birds.
Yes. Good eat.
I had my answer at least. The art of deception is a product of civilization. I didn't believe at the time that she was capable of it. The great fluttering continued, and I gesticulated sufficiently to get her moving back towards the camp. I had the remainder of her catch handed off to the provisioners. If it was in fact edible, taking it into the salt barrels would render something preservable. It soon became time to share my interrogatory results with the rest of the officers. The appropriate parties were summoned to the command caserne, and we gave the order to begin breaking camp for our brief transit to the English settlement. I caught Moltke smoking and demanded he share one with me. I didn't have the chance to retrieve my own from my effects before the meeting began. I continued to draw on my cigarette while addressing the critical issues. Gentlemen, it seems there is much to be learned here. Our recent acquisitions of the local fauna and the capture of the primitive have yielded some interesting information. On the pressing point, our attackers from the previous day were not in the pay of the French. I understand that there was a concern that such actions by proxy would befall us during the course of our mission, but you can lay your fears at rest. The primitives take to testing the mettle of newcomers in battle. Whether or not we pass the test is a question that needs no further inquiry. If they make another go at it, we will be ready. On that matter, the pom-poms will now travel without the tarpaulins. Their actions need to be subject to a better measure of timeliness. Put the crews through the drills necessary to reduce their time to readiness. The identity of our new guest has been clarified to an extent. She claims to be the daughter of one of their military leaders. She indicated that there would be a time of preparation before any attempt at rescuing her would be made. If they come diplomatically, rather than on the offensive, we will receive them with the proper dignity. We got lucky today regarding the changes in the breakfast menu. The men are not to consume anything that is not provided by the provisioners and quartermasters until we are scientifically certain that the local forage is safe, regardless of who offers provisions to the men. Deny them outright unless Moltke or myself provide authorization. Our march will take us into the city of New Kirkwall before the luncheon hour. I have accepted, on behalf of the men, and of all of you, to attend some terrible fandango that the governor is holding. I will not require your attendance, but if you wish to experience the last gasp of civilized company, you may wish to attend alongside me. When we arrive, permit the English to allocate appropriate quarters for the men, and pay forward the week's salaries for them to spend as they wish. If there is nothing else, you are to mount up and join the column. Diesel, now representing the scientific contingent ad hoc, spoke up.
Your Majesty, did she speak to the effect of her people's monstrous mounts?
I did not inquire.
May I inquire on that subject?
She will remain under my direct control until such time as an appropriate solution can be found as to confinement. If you wish to take up the role of interrogator, you have my approval. Commander Tirpitz can share a carriage with Captain Hindenburg, and you may join her and I in ours. With that, I dismissed them, and we moved towards the column. The last tent peg was knocked out, and I once again thanked God that we had survived the rigors of this strange place. Our route took us off of the sandstone plateaus that characterized our tenure here so far. Now we moved through the thickness of vegetation. The road didn't lose us. Whoever is responsible for its upkeep has been doing a solid job. Whoever was manicuring the tendrils and vines of the various plants should be hanged. As such, visibility on our flanks was limited, and the paranoid twisting of Moltke's neck from side to side while he rode at the head made plain his fears. Our column condensed itself to maneuver properly, and to an extent became strung out too far. My binoculars served little purpose here. The occasional shifting of this unearthly wind through the undergrowth put me on edge, and I felt the sweat drip down towards my collar. My companions were decidedly less concerned. Diesel, speaking to Sintra throughout, paid no mind but to that which was ahead of us. Then we found an obstacle. A cow, a bull. The woolliness of the thing was mystifying. The relative warmth of this place must have made it uncomfortable. It sat in the road, blocking our passage, and pulled at the weeds and flowers erupting from between the stone bricks. The enormous curved horns that it bore made us reluctant to approach it. We had nearly come to a complete stop. The distraction of the animal's presence would have given our new enemy a perfect chance at an ambush, but it never came. One more thing to acquaint ourselves with. I hopped from the carriage and approached. I shouted at it, in an effort to scare it out of our path. No result. I prodded its midsection with my sheathed saber. It let out a low, rumbling moo. The thing was enormous, easily 10 feet in length, and the full head over the height of a man. I kept shouting at it, but it did not look up from its roadside picnic. Once it had finished the dandelion that it was consuming when we stumbled upon it, it moved to the next, foliage-covered gap between the bricks. I was reaching down to unholster my sidearm to give the creature the peace of the grave when that ambush I anticipated finally began. A rustling in the bushes on our right drew the rifles of the first 4 dozen men in rank towards it, and their target emerged. A man, in civilian clothes, a bit ratty but familiar to us. Broad patterned cloth, felt hat. Another followed him, similarly garbed. They froze in their steps and raised their hands above their heads. They spoke, and a partial relief found me.
Oh, holy Christ in the cradle!
Irish.
Don't you move, Murphy!
English. They were farmers, apparently, had gone searching for their livestock that had gotten loose. The younger one, the Irishman, nearly soiled himself when he emerged into our view. I spoke to them in English and informed them that they should remove their property from our path. They quickly did. Diesel lamented the loss of a specimen for our biologists to examine, but I had no intention of confiscating the property of civilians. I inquired as to how far we would need to continue before arriving at New Kirkwall proper. Less than an hour. Joy of joys. They lassoed the animal and, with some deliberate coaxing, it lumbered up the side of the road and into the undergrowth. The younger one waved goodbye to us, but the older one grabbed him by the collar and turned him about to follow the bovine. Farm animals would be the least of our concerns, now entering that nest of English madness. We continued, and the predictions of the farmers were proven accurate. New Kirkwall is English, English beyond the point of fault, organized in their own fashion, less meandering than Paris. The lit streets join and diverge at appropriate places. The contrast is evident between a planned construction and a sudden fall. Same heat to its scent as Paris, likely as a result of locals integrating into the community. Those red-coated infantry walked orderly paths through the streets leading to the southern gate. The signposts had scrawled on them all the various settlements that lay outside the proper city, Jackstown. Among them, an officer emerged. Stereotypes did him no justice. Monocle, pith helmet, riding boots that appeared bizarre in the absence of a horse. He greeted us with the due respect and informed us that the garrison quarters had been cleared for our use this evening, as the garrison had taken up maneuvers in the rural surroundings of the city. Brick walls, cobblestone roads, brown, peaked shingled roofs, lamplighters beginning their rounds, all the trappings of London. We gave order for the column to disperse, and our officers and theirs intermingled and began directing the mass of men to their allotted areas. Our command, namely myself, Moltke, Diesel, Hindenburg, Tirpitz, and Madame Sintra, would take up residence in the northern wing of the governor's palatial estate. Again, the surprised looks of the citizenry at our Daimlers and walking engines mirrored those we found in Paris. They seemed more enraptured by our mechanicals than our captive, which I found strange. An argument developed between one of our engineers and a man of their garrison, which resulted in a compromise that the walking engines would remain outside the walls, under a composite guard of their men and ours. Perhaps the French sent them advance notice of the machine's clumsiness. Traveling down the central boulevard brought back childhood memories of London. I never cared for the city. Too much going on without proper organization. Barkers screeching regarding the availability of new products. Boys distributing broadsheets and asking for pennies. The way the streets always seemed to have something going on. Never a rest day. They had been down here for enough time to bring about the construction of railways. The steam whistles of the craft, traveling in and out of the city, echoed against the masonry of the high streets. The wrought iron gate of the governor's residence opened before our carriage, the golden initials HG on the inset. Well-dressed sentries, pruned topiaries. A pity all that precision went to aesthetics and not functionality. The cobbles lead us to the covered drive, where the household staff, a motley crew, took our luggage on dollies and bade us to enter. It wasn't Charlottenburg, but it was immensely comfortable by comparison to our prior locales. We were led down the primary hall featuring all the facets, gilded crenellations and paintings of Her Imperial Majesty, and other critical figures of the English past greeted us in passing. He was of a vintage, this governor, could not be less than 50. Once, a colonel in Her Majesty's cavalry, judging by the equestrian statues on the lawn. George Henry Grey. He didn't greet us at the entrance, but the staff ushered us into the parlor and offered brandy. I accepted on behalf of the group, and a box of cigars slowly made its way around the menfolk. After several minutes he appeared and brought with him his wife and his son. He addressed me first, rightly.
Your Imperial Majesty.
Your Excellency, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. He went around and did that diplomatic dribbling that men retired from the field and shoved behind a desk do so well. He introduced his family, his wife Harriet and his son Edward. His son was near my age, perhaps younger. I didn't confirm my suspicion. Dressed appropriately for reception, his son bore the white uniform of a naval ensign, but no formation insignia. Curious. We huffed and puffed, and the parlor would have filled with a depth of smoke that a line of infantry might produce on the firing range before the doors opened for the colonel to depart. He addressed the room after about 20 minutes of milling about.
You fine gentleman and lady may wish to retire to the chambers reserved. Your luggage will be in situ, should you wish to have a change of clothing before our event begins properly.
His eyes went up and down Sintra's form. We appreciate the courtesy, Colonel. I had some moment to speak with the man's son before adjourning to our chambers. A quiet fellow. The uniform he wore was one of their diplomatic service, giving cause for the lack of insignia. seemed interested in the political, and I was happy to regale him with tales of Bismarck's legislative tantrums. We shared a brandy, and he rotated back through the guests before shuffling off down the hallway. Again, none seemed to be surprised by the presence of our primitive guest. I wasn't sure if it was the polite deference to us or the practice of ignoring the savage, but I intended to get some manner of information as to her people from the leadership here. The English have been accustomed to this place for nearly a generation now, and someone would surely have something of value to offer our inquiring minds. I chased the father, but found the son. Perhaps he could shed light on the issue. The remainder of our cohort headed towards the chambers that had been prepared for us. Young master, have you been in this place long?
10 years tomorrow, Your Majesty. London was my childhood.
Indeed. We have in our company a savage. She came to us by unorthodox circumstances.
A prisoner?
A guest for now, but my concern lingers. You look like a bright fellow. I'm sure you've learned much of the locals. Our efforts here would be greatly aided by some clarifications. Our government would be indebted to you. He rolled the thought around for a moment.
Father's office would have something of interest, I'm sure.
Lead the way, friend. We continued down the hall, and rather than turning left, turned right. A great oak door with polished brass handles greeted us, and the fellow produced a key from his coat that clicked open the lock. He beckoned me inside and began shuffling through the mountain of papers and codices that littered the room. It was well furnished, but again, I fear the English penchant for organization is limited to aesthetics. Books were scattered throughout the office, some in neat stacks, others open to certain pages of purview. The gas lamp on the desk flared into life, and Edward produced for me a small series of pamphlets.
These are most of what is given to our men in the field on the subject. I've some familiarity with them, and we have a moment. If His Majesty has specific questions, I may be able to assist.
What form of government do they follow? I figured this would be a point of his focus, given his interests.
They are a loose confederation, moving towards the development of a centralized government. The Yazata, they are called, and may be our closest relatives among the denizens here, primarily concerned with raiding and sellsword work.
That much we have learned. He looked up at me, concerned.
Did they bring a fight, sir?
Oh, damn it. I've let the cat from the bag. I ask that His Excellency's son keep this to himself. They fell upon us on the road, seemed suicidal of them, cut them and their reptilian cohort down in the dozens. The woman that you saw in the parlor was found after the combat, claims she is a warlord's daughter. He leaned backwards against the desk, forgetting that maintaining good posture before royalty was a matter of good etiquette. I didn't correct his lapse in good behavior. Our dialogue could be the key to this mess.
Their tendency is to see themselves as greater than those inhabitants below them, literally, and as a matter of status. They engage in raids to secure movable goods and sell them for healthy profit. Our men were subjected to them on occasion before we reached a kind of accord. Even here in the city, their menfolk ply their trade as guides to private interests. We've gained measure of knowledge from them regarding the other inhabitants, and our commercial interests have supplied them with some goods. Nothing dangerous, no weapons or information of any worthwhile use, but they retain a fascination with the mechanical. Bicycles, telescopes and the like.
If our guest speaks the truth, will they come for her? Is there a way to return her without incurring some blood feud?
I bear His Majesty keep their critical governing principle in mind. The Yazata live by the maxim, if you can take it, it is yours. They're practical and material-minded. We haven't had the unfortunate chance to suffer a situation similar to yours. A collective decision-making governs them. If what the woman says is true, her father would need to gather support for a reprisal raid from among their various tribes. I apologize to His Majesty for inquiring as to this point, but have you...
He inhaled and paused for a moment, locking eyes with me.
Claimed her?
Not in the slightest.
Therein lies the trouble, then.
I'm not one for riddles, young master. Speak plainly. A chime sounded in the hallway. It seems that we were running out of our moment.
Remember the maxim, sir. If you can take it, it's yours. I would suggest that we adjourn for now. I will look into the matter for you further, if it would please you.
No, thank you. I think I've learned enough. I will commend you to our diplomatic service for your help.
Thank you, Your Majesty.
I opened the doors into an empty hallway. I followed Tirpitz's series of dirty limericks echoing over the tiled halls towards our evening accommodation.
There once was a maid from Kiel who thought she'd sit down for a meal.
I once attended a ball before I married Donna, Vienna, right after the rebellion in the south. At 17, I was mostly elbows and knees and one bad arm. They swarmed me anyway, those women. Scion of the ruling dynasty, officer in gold braid. All the weight must have broadened my shoulders into an attractive form. One after another dipped and spun, and all I felt in my heart and mind was my sweaty desperation not to bring my boot heel down in the wrong place. I had enough rhythm in me to keep to a waltz, but the activity never made itself into a favorite of mine. The pull chain on the bathing chamber dispensed warm water from a spigot in the ceiling. Marvelous invention. If I ever get back to Berlin, I'll have 12 of the damn things installed in the palace. As the water ran over me, I pondered all that the colonel's son had said. My chief concern was at what point claims and possession intersected. In the matter of property, it was not a difficult question to answer. Something you would hand to lawyers and have them recite bland articulations of statute. In the matter of persons, outside the United States until recently, and within the confines of innumerable dark and barbaric corners of the world, this was not so easy. I recentered myself on the task at hand. A ball, a dance. How bad could this be? I was afforded a magisterial dignity, but yearned to blend into the wallpaper. We were just another set of guests, likely among hundreds that had taken part in celebrations here. The soft white cotton of the towels brought forth a revelation. Goods can be returned, so long as you keep a receipt. I emerged from the water closet with a new plan. The golden cufflinks that held my sleeves in place were stubborn things. The white dress uniform and the remainder of the evening finery was well adapted for my difficulties, but I found it impossible to bend my fingers around in the right way to secure my right cuff. I had turned to this enormous mirror atop the cherrywood wardrobe in my room, focusing on the problem at hand, when movement behind me caught my eye. I turned, and there she was.
Prince?
Sintra. Therein lay the goods. Someone had been dear enough to supply her with a dress. How they managed to cram her into it without prompting violence was an inquiry better reserved for a team of physicians with a speciality in lunacy and the historians. A tight, low-cut number, azure, like her eyes. The paint had come off, and the white gloves covered over where the shackles had left a red, irritated ring around her wrists. Her hair remained down, against convention. What convention? Her people live in caves below the earth. She came into your graces on a winged lizard. You've been away from Donna for 3 weeks, not 3 years. Get a hold of yourself. A full and fine ensemble indeed. She must have observed my shirt sleeve struggle and approached. She took the link and threaded that needle with no effort. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Stop it. Do you dance?
Not in the red and blue way.
No matter.
Celebration for you.
Yes. Red are friends. We dance with friends. With the conquest of the cufflink, I opened the creaking door to the hall and walked down towards the commotion. The ballroom was well equipped. Guests appropriately attired began to pour forth from the parlor and inwards. Not a masquerade, thankfully. We lacked the romantic disguises. The white linen of the tablecloths amongst the dozens of amply provisioned buffets gave an impression of depth now, but they would inevitably be pulled back towards the walls when the torturous dance began in earnest. I had found Tirpitz lingering near a table at the far end, and we took our seats. Our little circle from earlier in the parlor had reformed, albeit with Moltke and Tirpitz swapping positions. I leaned into Tirpitz and begged for a cigarette, and he obliged. Through the cloud, the remainder of the guests took their seats. Looked like any other event on the surface. Mealy-mouthed merchants and bureaucrats and handsome men of the services trading verbal jousts. The womenfolk looking on between them, deciding on which among the men would become their prey, except the one seated next to me, who continued to try and catch my gaze. Stop it. Finally it began. The colonel entered, who appeared impressive even at his age. A Victoria Cross was the only distinction I could make out, although I'm sure Moltke could name all the others. In his arms was his wife, who bid the guests take their seats for a brief address from the governor.
Esteemed gentlemen and ladies, I make a presentation of our guests of honor.
Oh Christ.
the Honorable Crown Prince Wilhelm of Germany, Commander Tirpitz of the Imperial Navy, Major General Moltke of the Imperial Army and their accoutrements.
I stood and gave a wave to the thundering applause. We all did, even Sintra. How does she know what to do? The simulacrum is uncanny.
I would now ask the Prince to speak a few words and inaugurate the festivities.
I remained standing while my cohort returned to their seats. The time between the echoing of the applause and the eventual silence permitted me a moment of preparation. I would first thank the Honourable Colonel for his invitation to this splendor-filled evening. As a military man, I appreciate his willingness to accommodate ourselves and the men on such a short notice. It has been a revelation, journeying beneath the earth, and yet I find the same camaraderie among men and ladies such as yourselves that I would find in the gilded palaces of Potsdam or the idyllic country estates of Dartmoor. It is my sincere hope that the joys of this evening will be paralleled by the bounty of good relations between our nations. Thank you all for opening your doors and your hearts to our humble party. The applause continued apace. I didn't think my words were that inspiring, but I imagine there is a protocol of politeness to impromptu speakers. We would be afforded a brief reception to take in libation and mingle with the other guests before the main event began, and I savoured it. Tirpitz and Moltke quickly disappeared into the mass of women. Diesel, I think, ended up speaking with some of the more anorak-looking fellows. He seemed pleased. I wish I was. It only seemed appropriate for Sintra to take my arm and for us to relate our thanks to our hosts. She and I approached the crowd that had ensconced the colonel. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, indeed. He felt an obligation to introduce me to those around him. Madame Wilcott, wife of Lord Wilcott, the proprietor of the rail stops in and around New Kirkwall. Lovely lady. Big brown eyes one could drown in, teeth like a dilapidated picket fence. Mr. Conrad Fennington Beauchamp, our beloved representative from the Foreign Ministry. Good man. Obvious spy, too tall and well-built for a desk licker. Mr. Pierre Devereaux of the French Assembly. We've met. Miss Heilig Schultz, our representative from the Austrian court. Lovely lady. Perhaps the blue on her tongue was some attempt to gain favor with the primitives. We made our way around when Sintra's attention was grabbed by another man. He introduced himself as someone from the anthropological field. Shorter than I, youthful look about him. English Linguistic Sciences representative from the NETEC. He thanked me for receiving him and then turned to Sintra and began speaking to her in her own language. A guttural thing, but he certainly had a command of it. I could see her eyes show that spark I had seen when we first spoke in my tent. Felt like a lifetime ago. I felt a flush at this surreal happening. Tirpitz found the barman and began making demands. My eyes twitched with irritation. Jealous? Stop it. Their conversation continued until he reached for her arm. She swatted it away and hissed. I cackled inside my mind. Try elsewhere, Cad. This one is... Stop it! He walked away. The time eventually came for the dance. It only felt right to remain attached to my current partner. The staff cleared the tables from the room, and the band began with a waltz, as is right. I took her hand in mine and brought my other hand around her waist. Had she been any taller, this would have proven a difficult task, but we fit together like a lock and key. Stop it. A flowing piece. Could hear the strings begin to pour over us, and the rhythm took hold. Something from that new composer Strauss, I figured. Couldn't pick it out by name if I tried. Fast enough to keep me paying attention. Slow enough to take in the others around me. Tirpitz always had an affinity for the English. We diverged past him and some perfumed rose that he had managed to wrangle. I will admit, despite his appearance, he can keep up quite well. I could hear Moltke's boot spurs click and scrape against the wood over my right shoulder, but didn't see who he picked up. Our fandango continued for several minutes in this direction, and then custom dictated everyone turn eastward. I think it was eastward. Step and slide. Her grip dug into my shoulder, but she took to my lead easily. She wasn't uncomfortable, but it became obvious that the waltz wasn't the preferred dance of the primitives. Such a fact shocks the reader's conscience, I'm sure. In any case, we managed not to collide with anyone, and I could feel her relax a bit as we maneuvered around the room. When we went for the turn, I locked eyes with Tirpitz and he winked at me. I could have pulled away from Sintra and slapped the beard clean from his face, but she clicked her tongue at me and bid me pay attention to her. It was difficult to hear her over the music, but the proximity made her audible.
Prince moves well.
It was difficult not to smile. I try my best. Swing and dip. Our hosts passed by us. I drifted away again and pondered the life I left above. It had a succinct flavor that I had grown to miss. Not this kind of thing in particular, but the pleasures of the galleries and walks through the palace gardens and the warm brandy in the parlor during Christmas. Donia, the children. This little engagement here may be the closest indication that the life above was not simply a fantasy. Finally, the last measure. I broke away from the pack and headed towards our table. I left my champagne there and was desperate to retrieve it. Considering the circumstances, they must be sending for something decent. Sharp-tasting stuff. Hint of apple? Tirpitz and Moltke had felt similarly, apparently. I could hear the muffled chuckling behind me. Struggling to find my cigarette case, they surrounded the table and retrieved their own chalices. The Major General spoke first.
A lovely event.
He raised his glass.
To His Honourable Majesty and his stunning companion.
I scowled at him, but it felt beneath me to chastise him in public. I turned and saw that some of the crowd had joined us, and the obligation to receive the toast overcame me. That fellow from the Netic had shuffled out of the ballroom quickly, quicker than etiquette would dictate. How strange. The colonel had beckoned for an additional dance, and while the band began to draw strings, I failed to pick out Sintra from the crowd. Ah, there she is, following the fellow out. The handle of silvered cutlery glinted from the cops of her white glove. God almighty. I dropped my glass and could hear it smash onto the floor. The staff rushed over to clean the presumable mess, and another among them came towards me, a platter full of flutes in hand, and I shoved him off. A purposeful walk evolved into a ragged jog departing the ballroom. I caught a glimpse of her pinetto heel turned towards the parlor. We can't let her murder a man. For what? Taking a forward approach? Madness. You wouldn't mind it, Wilhelm? Nonsense. The fellow is a representative of a foreign nation's business interests. If she kills him, we have to cover the whole thing up, or I wouldn't mind it really. Stop it. I arrived at the parlor in a huff. The doors are closed. No screaming yet. Throwing open the door didn't help. The great gallery window overlooking the lawn had been opened. Sintra was leaning over the railing, desperately looking for him. Some relief, then, that we hadn't brought a primitive murderess into the heart of the English governor's estate. One less scandal to have our diplomats diffuse. Before she attempted to climb out the window and give chase, fate spoke through me. She hadn't noticed my entry, so I took a more cautious approach than an interrogatory one. Sintra, what are you doing? She turned and gave a poorly fabricated look of incredulity.
Merchant gave dishonor to you.
The ride begins again. No, Sintra. His forward approach dishonored you, not me.
Forward?
Brunt, brusque, blatant, explicit.
Lustful.
Close enough for a primitive with a tenuous grasp of the language. Let us go with that. Yes, improper of him. You are right to be offended, but we do not murder men for being improper.
Dishonor to Prince is crime.
A harm to Prince is a crime. Hurt, not words. Another puzzled look. This time, it did seem genuine. Come here and give me the knife. She approached and handed it over. I took her gloved hand in mine and ran my grip down the length of it. Searching for more improvised weapons, mind you. Sintra looked up towards me, and what happened next was equal parts tragedy and comedy. I don't have an excuse. It was so easy to lose yourself in those eyes. She leaned into me and met my lips. A deep kiss, a tinge of excitement. I could not stop myself and returned it. I lived a lifetime in the moment between us. My hands ran over her cheeks and met her velvet black curls. Her hair smelled of spring cherries. Singular focus. Many sensations. Warm, familiar. Heat, strange, soft. Click, flash, acrid smell. Photographer, violence. There was a Roman author, Tacitus, who first described our people. It was his words that brought us into the light of history. His travels throughout ancient Germany gave light to the lives of the ancient forebears. Among the tribal traditions was head-taking. Severing the head from the body gave our pagan ancestors a method to dishonor their enemies, and gave trophies to successful chiefs to demonstrate their power. One of his more applicable turns of phrase continues to echo in my head: Furor Teutonicus, Teutonic fury. I understood him now, personally. Knife in hand, I chased the figure down the hallway. I hadn't given him a terrific head start. The chase began when I turned from Sintra and began a full pelt rush towards the man. Turning out of the parlor, you could hear the clatter of his infernal image machine as it hit the marble floor. Some satisfaction. I barreled down towards the front entrance. Guests, in a flash, pushed from the way. Hopefully none the wiser to the Hohenzollern air chasing a photographer with a knife. Some startled exasperation, but no screams. Nothing to bring attention to it. No reliable witnesses. He ran straight through a hedge shaped like a lion, and I followed through the foliage, ripping a button from my tunic in the process. Our path led us, not towards the open street and gangway, but around the rear of the estate. I was gaining on him. Brown coat, black shoes. The windows on this side of the building remained closed. The lamps illuminating the perimeter didn't reveal any sentries. Good. We nearly made it around towards the back garden when he stumbled. The rose-thorn hedge that he fell into could not have felt pleasant. The limited light made it difficult to discern his face. No matter. I stood over him and knelt, my grasp finding itself around his pencil-like neck. Wringing the life from him, he was too out of breath to launch a desperate attempt to identify himself. He looked at me, heaving ragged breaths from the exertion, and I did see a fear. Some rancid little Parisian tabloid will miss their celebrity specialist. You can't let this get out. You can't bring that dishonor home to father, to grandfather, home to Dona and the children, to your people. You can't let it get out. You can't let him get away. Neckline, blade, puncture. I couldn't stop it. Nature had taken me. Stooped there, in the colonel's rose hedge, not a dozen paces from the back garden path, I murdered a man. Writing this, now I regret the killing. Not my reasons for it, but the killing itself. I still don't abide photographers, but the cause that brought me to this sad pass in the hedgerow was my own vanity. That kiss killed this man. I killed this man. Nothing for it. Even royalty isn't absolved of a violation of the sixth commandment. I pushed his corpse underneath the trim line of the hedge and put my bloodied glove in my pocket. I placed the knife in the breast pocket of my tunic and straightened myself. I walked at a steady pace towards the estate's entrance, though the pounding of my heart made it almost difficult to keep step. There wasn't a crowd, thank God. I shuffled past some of the guests that, now that the evening had begun in earnest, were now enthralled by the ballroom's echoing laughter and paying no mind to me. The camera laid in the entrance to the parlor. Glass lens of the aperture shattered against the rock. There's a simile or metaphor that I could make, but recounting the events makes it difficult. I called over a servant and informed him that a photographer had rushed from the estate after a malfunction with his device. The sweeping of brooms and the rickety collection of wooden legs that held up the device were folded and removed from the path of the hall. The ballroom now swung gaily. The music had changed. Something more upbeat, a driving tempo that shuffled the older man out for the youth to move in their place. Thankfully, my new accomplice in Tirpitz decided to sit one out. I took a deep breath and took my seat next to him. Someone must have come by and distributed more champagne. I indulged.
Enjoying yourself, Your Majesty?
Lovely event. Cigar?
Certainly.
Perhaps in the garden? Hate to stink up the colonel's good fabrics.
As His Majesty desires.
I led him to my crime. He seemed a bit shocked, went quiet for a bit, which for him seemed like only a reaction to the devil himself crawling from Cocytus. The burning ends of our cigars were the only light on this side of the estate. Hadn't even heard a sentry make a patrol. I was almost thankful. He spoke, and I thought the words were some kind of jest.
Did he offend Your Majesty?
I chewed on the quiet and chose my words carefully. He would have killed me if I didn't kill him.
He was armed?
In a way.
Well, thankfully, we were prepared.
What? Tirpitz gave sort of a hoot, like a drunken owl, twice. I thought he had lost his mind until I began to hear rustling from the foliage. The surrounding shrubbery began to ruffle with life. From it emerged a group of men, 5 figures. No colors, but our weapons. Our distinctive helmet deprived of its pointed spike, grey uniforms smudged with the wet mud of the surrounding foliage, masks woven from long, verdant grass obscured their faces, had no notion they were even there. They slung their carbines over their shoulders and crept towards us, silent as the grave. Tirpitz didn't turn his gaze from the corpse. A whisper erupted from his lips. Another whisper responded.
Lieutenant Meyer,
Commander Tirpitz, sir, Your Majesty.
can you dispose of this for us?
Certainly, Commander.
2 of them hoisted the fellow from his thorn deathbed. At a crouch, they shuffled back towards the rear hedgerow and disappeared into the darkness. The remaining 3 followed their comrades, up and over the iron fence that surrounded the lawn. Marine infantry are such useful men, willing to infiltrate a foreign governor's estate under the cover of darkness, willing to sit in a moist shrubbery for 7 hours in the insects and the mud, willing to dispose of a prince's wrongdoings. When silence finally returned to us, we began our walk back towards the entrance. Again, through the guests, through those marble halls. I walked past that damned parlor door, and for a moment, the 2 of us were alone. Tirpitz again pierced the silence.
That poor fellow will be found in 3 different bodies of water tomorrow.
I had no words for this. We returned to the ballroom, and it seemed as though the band had adjourned for a moment. Moltke was happily chatting to our host regarding some great past victory, I'm sure. I sat down at our table again. The staff seemed very attentive. Another indulgence in that champagne would surely bring me towards the sleep of the condemned. Sintra nowhere to be seen. The evening began to wind down. The band dispersed, and our hosts, at their age, bid us a good evening and retired to their chambers. Tirpitz, Moltke and I sat and began to drink. After the 5th bottle, I was sure that we would need to be brought to our chambers in a gurney. The smoke from our cigarettes formed a ring of mist around our table. Only the clatter of the staff collecting plates and the folding of tablecloths accompanied the occasional burp from one of us. Moltke leaned over the table and jeered at us. The ring of carmine lip colouring around his moustache was unseemly, but I was happy for him. Must have made another conquest, I suppose. Good party then, gentlemen?
I should think so.
His Majesty's partner seems to have slipped away.
His Majesty's commander of torpedoes should shut his bearded yap.
As you wish, sir.
Tirpitz let out some tremendous belch, and some of the staff turned to us before we shuffled down towards our accommodation. I felt the soft silk sheets calling to me. I should have extinguished my cigarette, but I didn't feel the compulsion at the time. Just as the evening began, the struggle with my right cufflink brought it to a conclusion. I had hunched over, trying to flick the thing free with my bad hand when she arrived. From the water closet, in my smoking jacket. She released it, just as before, and then she released me.
Prince, let me help.
The smoking jacket fell to the floor. Magnificent. All the thought of the prior week drifted away from that knot that had formed in my mind. Looking in retrospect, the entire course of events of the evening had been out of my control. God enjoys his power to force men's hands into the most curious of places. The trigger of a rifle, the crystal chalices bearing champagne, the papery rolled tube of a cigarette, the flash pan of a camera, the pearl handle of a carving knife, the soft flesh of a woman. God claims his powers and knows them, and it is for men to act in accordance or against his will. Man can only claim the instruments of God's plan. Perhaps Sintra was one of those instruments sent by him to confound my beliefs, try my patience, and drive a damnable wedge between my obligations as future sovereign and my desires as a man. Just another one of God's instruments. So I claimed her.